Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Several people sent me an interesting story out of the great Northwest, and here's the idea. You know that in the old days, they used to talk about people who went to prison making license plates. That was a joke, that you'd get your license plates made in prison. And so if you're in prison, you might get put to work making license plates. In the old days, they might joke about you going to prison and breaking rocks, breaking rocks in the hot sun. But the idea that they put you to work in prison, the question is, do you get paid? And I've spoken to people who spent time in prison, and they got jobs in the prison where they were paid, but they're not paid very much. In fact, they're often paid things like pennies on the hour as opposed to minimum wage. And so the question becomes, what happens if you're being held at a for-profit prison? And we've talked about these recently, how there's jails and prisons and detention centers that are run for profit. They're privately run for profit. And I personally am not too crazy about the idea of outsourcing law enforcement. I'm not. And I know that prisons and detention centers aren't necessarily law enforcement in that sense, but they're all tied together into the same business, right? So from NPR, but widely reported, Martin Cast wrote the story, detainees who earned just $1 a day are now owed $17 million in back pay. That is after a federal jury in Tacoma, Washington, said that the company running a large detention center for ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement of the U.S., owes former detainees $17.3 million in back pay for the work they did while they were there. Now, the company is Florida-based, for-profit, it's a prison company, and it paid detainees $1 a day, which is a practice that the jury determined earlier this week is a violation of the state's minimum wage law. And on Friday, they announced that back pay would add up to about $17.3 million. And so the simple question is, if you are putting people to work and it's a private institution, it's not a government institution, and you're putting them to work and paying them $1 a day when the minimum wage is higher than that, is that lawful? So Adam Berger, the attorney for the class, this is a class action, says this was about fair wages for work. This is just emblematic of other workers in this economy who are in exploitive labor situations. Now, one former detainee who was involved in the suit says he was detained at the Tacoma facility for 8 months, beginning in 2016, as he waited for his asylum claim to be processed. And his claim was processed, and eventually he was let go, and he's now living here and so on. During that time, he cleaned showers for $1 a day. He says that he wasn't forced to do the work, but he saw little choice. Here's the quote: "You have to do it to get the money to get the stuff you need, or also make a call to your friends and family members. It's unfair because the amount of the job or the kind of job we do is beyond what they were paying us." The class action was consolidated with a separate lawsuit which was brought by the state of Washington. The state of Washington itself also accused the company of violating state labor law and enriching itself unjustly. Now, meanwhile, the company argues that the detainees were not employees under Washington law and that the state itself pays less than minimum wage to prisoners in its corrections facilities, which is true. But guess why? Turns out there's a law that says they can do that. The state minimum wage law in Washington exempts people living in state, county, or municipal detention facilities. So if it's a state facility, a county facility, or a municipal facility, then the people who are working there can be paid less. The Tacoma site deals with the feds, but it's owned by a private company. The company made $18.6 million in profits from the Tacoma Detention Center in 2018, and it acknowledged in a previous trial that it could have paid the detainees more. They just didn't. The company did not respond to a request for comment from NPR. The jury awarded the former detainees $17.3 million in back pay on Friday, and it's still up to the U.S. District Judge to determine how much money the company must pay the state on its claim of unjust enrichment. So the state lawsuit is still proceeding, but the jury has returned on the individuals' lawsuits, or the lawsuits actually brought on behalf of the individuals, although it was a class action. Berger says about 10,000 former detainees are eligible to share the back pay, but he says now there's a problem because many of the detainees have been let go. He goes, we're going to have a big job ahead of us, locating all of these folks to try to give them the money that they've earned. And quite frankly, some of them we might not be able to find. The attorneys also plan on petitioning the court separately for their fees. So some people I know are going to ask and say, well, Steve, of the $17.3 million, how much of that goes to the attorneys? Well, it looks like this was a cause of action where the attorneys can bring a motion before the court and ask to be compensated separately for their work. And some statutes allow for that. So in that case, they might just be taking what the court gives them, assuming the court gives them something in response to their request. The man I quoted earlier talking about how hard the work was and why it was necessary was a lead plaintiff in the class action. He received asylum in 2017, and he now lives in suburban Seattle. And he does want to remind people that he does, in fact, now have a job. So he has a job now on the outside, and he's being paid at least minimum wage, we would assume, because that's what the law says you get paid. So I know some people have a problem with this and say, Steve, if you're being held in jail, everyone knows. Well, number one, this isn't jail. This is a detention center. And I did the story earlier this week about the guy who was a U.S. citizen with his passport on him. Got picked up by ICE and held in a detention center for a week. He's held in a detention center for a week. So there are people there for a variety of reasons. And while they're there, if it was a county jail, the county jail could say, do you want to work? We'll pay you a pittance. But because it's a privately run facility and it's not affiliated with the state, there's no state law that says, oh, by the way, you can put these people to work and pay them $1 a day. So again, you might not like that. I'm simply pointing out that's the law. And obviously, if there was a problem with this and enough people were upset about this, or if there were enough corporations upset about it, they could go and lobby and get the law changed and make it work that way. Because I know there are going to be some people who are going to say, Steve, really, what's the difference? What would be the difference between the private facility on the one hand and the municipal facility on the other? What would be the difference? And the only difference I can really think of is the fact that many of the facilities we're talking about that are run by the state are places where people have been sentenced. So you're in for 12 to 15 years for something you did. And they say, while you're here, do you want to kill some time and work in the license plate shop? I can see somebody going, you know something, they're going to pay me 3 cents an hour, but I'll take it. I can see that. But if you've been driving around on your motorcycle and get picked up by ICE because they don't believe that you actually have a passport on you, and you're being held for a week, and they say, oh, by the way, while you're here, do you want to work for $1 a day? That is a different situation. I know some people are also going to say, Steve, but they don't have to do it. That's true. That's true. But as the man pointed out, if you're there and you've got no money, and that's all there is, So I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm an attorney, simply telling you what the law is and how this case came out. So from National Public Radio, Martin Cast wrote it. Nathan, Eric, Benjamin, Nicholas, and Steve, not me, all sent it. Thank you very much, people. Detainees who earned just $1 a day are now owed $17 million in back pay, a jury says. And of course, that could still go up on appeal. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. In order to seek one's own direction, one must simplify the mechanics of ordinary everyday life.